Tonight, we slip quietly into the rugged heart of Afghanistan, where jagged mountains loom against the night sky and the wind whistles through narrow valleys like an ancient storyteller. The stars hang impossibly close, as if they have been watching for centuries, which they have observing every caravan, every invading army, every tribal gathering around a fire. Before we begin, if this little corner of calm has brought you any comfort, feel free to like the video and subscribe only if it feels genuine to you. No pressure. I'd also love to hear from you. Just drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always special to know we're all quietly gathered here from different corners of the world, like a family scattered but still connected. All right. Now go ahead and dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan or a soft hum in the background, something that feels like home. Nestle in, get cozy, and let's ease into tonight's story together. You trudge along stony paths that twist through the Hindu Kush, feeling the cold bite your cheeks even as the sun burns above. Here, geography is destiny. The mountains isolate villages into self-sufficient pockets. The deserts stretch endlessly, and the passes become lifelines and traps all at once. Historians still argue whether it was this landscape or the fierce independence of the tribes that made Afghanistan famously hard to conquer, but the two are tangled like roots in dry soil. You hear shepherds singing to their flocks in a language you don't understand, yet the tone says everything: pride, endurance, maybe a hint of defiance. By the time you pass into the lowlands trade, caravans have gathered, swapping silk for spices, gossip for gold. This crossroads of Asia has seen Greeks, Persians, Mongols, and countless others trudge the same ground, each leaving traces, each convinced they could rule here forever. Spoiler alert, they couldn't. Even Alexander the Great had to sweet-talk tribal chieftains and marry a local princess just to get by. The British much later would learn the same hard truth, though they probably wished someone had left a note about it. In the 18th and early 19th centuries, the Durrani Empire had held Afghanistan together under Ahmad Shah Durrani's heirs, but by the 1800s it was fragmenting like an old clay pot. Rival chiefs jockeyed for power, alliances shifted as quickly as mountain weather, and the British East India Company, ever the opportunistic guest who overstays their welcome, started peeking northward from India. Russia meanwhile peered southward, and Afghanistan suddenly found itself in what would be called the Great Game. You can almost hear the pieces clattering on that imperial chessboard, except this board has cliffs and every pawn carries a musket. Somewhere, a mullah calls the faithful to prayer, his voice threading through the crisp air. The people gather not as a nation under one banner, but as clans and tribes tied to the land and to each other in ways no foreigner can untangle. This is the Afghanistan you walk through tonight, proud, divided, resilient. The stage is set, the mountains are watching, and far to the south, British officials in Calcutta are drafting plans they will soon regret. The quirky tidbit, local warriors swore that the mountains themselves fought on their side, hiding them in mists and sending avalanches onto enemies. Maybe just folklore, but when you see those peaks catching the moonlight, you kind of believe it. The tension rises as dusk falls, painting the rocks in shades of purple. Somewhere beyond those ridges, history is about to turn sharp, and you, quiet traveler under the stars, are about to witness the first collision between an empire and a land that refuses to be tamed. You wake to the chill of dawn as a pale mist curls over the Kabul River, and with it comes the scent of damp earth and horse sweat. It's 1839, and British troops, thousands of them, trudge into Afghanistan under orders to install a friendly King Shah Shuja on the throne. You watch them march, boots clattering, bright uniforms flashing like peacocks among the drab mountains. They look confident, almost smug, as if this rugged land is just another square to color red on the map. You almost want to warn them the mountains don't care about maps. The British part of the mighty East India Company are here to counter Russian influence. The Great Game is heating up, and Afghanistan is the buffer neither empire wants to lose. Shah Shuja, a former ruler ousted years ago, is dragged back like a puppet on imperial strings. Locals stare from behind walls, their eyes hard. Historians still argue whether Afghans hated Shah Shuja more for his corruption or simply for being Britain's man. But either way, you sense trouble brewing like a storm behind the peaks. You ride along with the British column through the Bolan and Khyber passes, where narrow trails squeeze you between cliffs so tight they feel like they're holding their breath. Afghan tribesmen perch on ridges above silent, watching, waiting. You think of a quirky little fact the British brought along: camels, elephants, even crates of wine and silver tea sets, as if afternoon tea would stay civilized under sniper fire. Spoiler, it wouldn't. In Kabul, they set up camp and pat themselves on the back. The city, a patchwork of mud brick houses and bustling bazaars, hums with trade and tension. You sip tea in a market stall, overhearing whispers of revolt. Afghans may seem compliant on the surface, but in the mountains, alliances are forming, blades are sharpening. Shah Shuja rules but barely. He's protected by British bayonets, and he taxes his people harshly to fund his lavish court. You wander his palace, noting how uneasy he looks despite the jewels. He knows his power is as thin as the glass in his windows. The British, meanwhile, underestimate everything: the tribal dynamics, the winter, and the sheer willpower of a people who have spent centuries resisting outsiders. A local elder warns you with a glint in his eye. These hills eat armies. You chuckle nervously, thinking it's just bravado. But soon night fires flare on mountain ridges, signaling revolt. Afghans unite under leaders like Akbar Khan, a charismatic warrior who channels resentment into action. They ambush outposts, cut supply lines, and turn Kabul into a pressure cooker. By late 1841, it's clear the occupation is cracking. British officers sipping their wine dismiss warnings until it's too late. The uprising explodes, streets erupt with gunfire, and garrisons fall one by one. You duck through alleys as bullets whistle past, realizing the Empire's grip is slipping like sand through fingers. As winter sets in, the British make a fateful decision: retreat to India. They march out of Kabul in January 1842, about 16,000 soldiers, camp followers and families, an entire city on the move. Snow begins to fall, and you shiver under a ragged cloak. The mountains, silent and merciless, seem to close in. You can't help but smirk at the irony: the invincible empire reduced to a desperate column stumbling through icy passes, harried by Afghan marksmen who vanish into the rocks. Each night, the fires burn smaller, the cries grow fewer. By the time the survivors stagger toward Jalalabad, only one man, Dr. William Bryden, reaches the gates, alive, his horse collapsing beneath him. His arrival shocks the British garrison, a ghostly messenger of imperial hubris. As you look back, the mountains glow under a cold moon. They seem almost amused, as if whispering, "Told you so." The First Anglo-Afghan War ends not with treaties, but with silence, a silence so deep it feels like the land itself is exhaling. You realize this is just the beginning. The British will return, and the mountains will still be waiting. The snow crunches beneath your boots as you follow the ghostly trail of that doomed retreat toward Abim. 1842, a trail littered with abandoned carts, shattered muskets, and frozen shapes huddled against boulders. The silence is almost holy, broken only by the wind carrying echoes of gunshots long gone. You shiver, not just from the cold, but from the weight of what happened here. The British Army, the pride of an empire, utterly destroyed by a force they dismissed as ragtag tribesmen. Even now, historians still argue whether it was tactical brilliance, sheer Afghan determination, or British arrogance that sealed the army's fate. Maybe it was all three stirred together in a blizzard that had no mercy. You trudge alongside the stragglers in your mind's eye, their faces hollow, their red coats torn, their hands raw from frostbite. Each bend in the mountain pass feels like a trap, because it often is. Afghan fighters pop up from behind rocks, rifles crack, arrows whistle. They don't engage in pitched battles. They bleed the column slowly like a wolf pack, wearing down prey. You imagine one soldier muttering through chattering teeth, "This wasn't in the plan." Of course, no one ever plans to be hunted in the snow by men who know the land like their own heartbeat. By the time you reach the narrow defile of Gandamak, the air smells of gunpowder and despair. Here, the final stand unfolds a desperate circle of the last survivors, firing wildly as Afghan horsemen swarm. A quirky tidbit. Some survivors reportedly used broken bayonets lashed to sticks, fighting to the last breath. When the smoke clears, the snow is trampled red, and only a handful of captives are taken. The legend of Afghanistan as the graveyard of empires is born right here, in the frost and silence. You drift back to Kabul, where the British had left behind their wounded, their women, and their pride. These left-behinds faced uncertain fates. Some were treated with rough honor, others vanished into the mountains. The city smells of smoke and ash, with looted supplies scattered like confetti after a grim parade. Yet amid the chaos, there's a strange twist. Afghan leaders, practical as ever, allow surviving prisoners to eventually be ransomed. This isn't just revenge, it's politics Afghan style. Back in India, the shock is seismic. Newspapers scream headlines of disaster parliament fumes, and Queen Victoria herself is said to have been horrified. The British retaliate in anger, sending avenging armies that storm Kabul, burning the bazaar to cinders before withdrawing. You watch the flames rise against the night, a pyre of imperial pride. They leave Afghanistan behind, bloodied but unconquered, their reputation badly bruised. As you sit by a small campfire under the stars, an Afghan elder shares a saying with a sly smile. "You may have the watches, but we have the time." You chuckle, knowing it will echo through history. The British lick their wounds, convinced they'll never return, yet you know they will, because empires have short memories when pride is at stake. This land, though, remembers everything. Every ridge, every valley holds the memory of resistance. You lie back, staring at the cold stars, realizing you're only in the early chapters of a long saga. The snow may melt, the bones may fade, but the legend of that retreat of a single battered survivor stumbling into Jalalabad will haunt imperial dreams forever. You wander now into the quieter years that follow, though quiet in Afghanistan is always relative. The 1840s and 1850s drift by like a slow river under a sharp sky, but underneath the surface, currents twist and swirl. Britain, licking its wounds, steps back from Kabul, vowing not to meddle, at least not so openly. Yet the empire's gaze never truly leaves these mountains, because Russia is still creeping down from the north like a bear testing the edge of a campsite. You sip tea in a smoky caravanserai where merchants gossip not just about prices, but about spies. The great game has begun in earnest, and Afghanistan, whether it wants to or not, is the chessboard everyone fights over. You overhear British officers muttering in far-off Indian cantonments, their maps dotted with pins lines and names like Herat and Kandahar. They can't resist plotting. Meanwhile, Russian agents slip through Central Asia, their boots crunching snow in places the British can't see. Historians still argue whether these spies were brilliant operatives or just men stumbling through deserts with half-baked orders, but their shadows loom large in Afghan memory. Somewhere in a tea house in Herat, a stranger with a thick accent and too many questions pays for everyone's drinks because information like tea is cheap but never free. Afghanistan, for its part, is not idle. Dost Muhammad Khan, the wily emir who once fought the British, regains power after Shah Shuja's fall. You watch him balance diplomacy like a tightrope walker playing one empire against the other. When he allies with the British, at times it's out of necessity, not love. You can almost hear his inner voice: better to keep the fox you know close than the bear you don't. His court, a mix of tribal elders and urban elites, hums with intrigue. Even the carpets on the floor seem to listen. The land remains stubbornly itself. You ride through dusty villages where kids chase goats and women bake bread in clay ovens. Life goes on as it always has, with loyalty to clan and mosque outweighing any distant ruler's decrees. The quirky tidbit you pick up: in some areas, tribes resolve disputes by poetic duels. Yes, men hurl verses at each other, their rhymes sharper than swords. Try telling a British officer that a sonnet just won a border skirmish. As decades roll on, the British slowly tighten their grip on the edges, annexing Punjab, Sindh and Baluchistan. Afghanistan feels the noose drawing closer. You sit under a walnut tree with an Afghan Malik who squints at the horizon and mutters, "They think they're patient." They've never met our patience. Indeed, time here stretches differently, and Afghans play the long game better than anyone. The 1860s and 1870s see small conflicts flare like sparks, but no major war. Britain and Russia keep dancing, circling each other while pretending to be polite. Afghan rulers fortify their positions, knowing they're the pawn no one can afford to lose. You drift through Kabul's bazaars, noticing new goods: Russian rifles, British textiles, even the occasional samovar. Influence seeps in like water through cracks, but it never floods. One evening, as the sun bleeds red behind the mountains, you overhear two travelers arguing whether Afghanistan will ever be conquered. One laughs, saying not unless they tame the mountains. The other shakes his head, replying, "Or the men who live in them." You smile, knowing neither will happen soon. The great game's long shadow stretches across the land, a shadow that chills without freezing. The British bide their time, the Russians sharpen their claws, and Afghanistan waits sharp-eyed and unbowed like a hawk perched on a high crag. The next move is coming. You can feel it in the restless wind. You wake to the low rumble of artillery echoing off the hills. Britain is back and the mountains know it. It's 1878 and the Second Anglo-Afghan War begins with the same swagger as the first. You watch British columns march once more through the Khyber Pass, their red coats a moving ribbon of pride and presumption. They've convinced themselves that this time will be different. This time they'll teach Afghanistan a lasting lesson. You mutter under your breath, "Sure, good luck with that, because you already know how stubborn this land can be." The spark Russia sends a diplomatic mission to Kabul, and the British, paranoid about losing influence, demand equal treatment. Emir Sher Ali Khan, wary of Britain's heavy hand, refuses. That's all it takes. London sends troops, cannons roar and villages tremble. Historians still argue whether Britain truly feared Russia or just couldn't resist flexing its imperial muscles, but either way, the result is the same war. You trudge alongside the British columns as they sweep into Afghanistan with overwhelming force. Kandahar falls, Jalalabad falls, and even Kabul quivers. Sher Ali flees north, and his son Yaqub Khan inherits both the throne and the impossible task of negotiating with the British. By 1879, the Treaty of Gandamak is signed, granting Britain control over Afghan foreign policy. On paper, it looks like a victory. In reality, it's a leash no Afghan will wear for long. You wander the British residency in Kabul, where Sir Louis Cavagnari and his staff settle in with false confidence. The residency smells of leather chairs and smugness, but outside its walls, resentment simmers. Afghans whisper in alleys, tribal leaders plot, and the streets grow tense. Then it happens in September 1879. Afghan soldiers mutiny, storming the residency and killing Cavagnari and nearly every Brit inside. You flinch at the crack of rifles and the roar of an enraged mob. The British, stunned, send more troops to punish Kabul, and again the city burns. Amid the chaos, you catch a glimpse of something unusual: Afghan women hiding rifles under their shawls, smuggling weapons to fighters. It's a quirky tidbit often lost in the grand narrative, but resistance here isn't just men with swords, it's an entire society quietly defiant. British forces reoccupy Kabul briefly, but guerrilla warfare bleeds them dry. The high passes choke supply lines, tribal fighters strike then vanish, and winter gnaws at morale. Eventually, the British realize holding Afghanistan is like trying to grasp smoke. By 1880, they install Abdur Rahman Khan, a strong emir willing to cooperate and withdraw their troops. The empire declares victory, but you can almost hear the mountains laughing again. Abdur Rahman consolidates power with an iron fist, earning the nickname Iron Emir. You watch him crush rebellions and centralize authority, all while carefully keeping Britain at bay. He accepts British subsidies and arms, but keeps foreign soldiers out. He's no puppet. He's a master of survival in a dangerous neighborhood. Historians still debate whether he was a nationalist hero or just a ruthless opportunist, but you can't deny his cunning. As the war ends, you sit by a crackling fire in a tribal camp. The warriors are tired but proud, swapping stories of ambushes and narrow escapes. One man grins through his beard and says, "They come with armies, we send them home with ghosts." You sip tea, nodding because you've seen it with your own eyes. The British leave once more their dreams of control in ashes. They hold Afghanistan at arm's length, propping up rulers but never daring to occupy again. You stretch out under the stars, knowing this chapter closes like the last, with the land unconquered, the empire humbled, and the mountains keeping their secrets. You wander now to the year 1893, when a single pen stroke redraws a map and casts a shadow that will last more than a century. The British, weary of endless skirmishes, yet still desperate to lock in their northern frontier, send Sir Mortimer Durand to negotiate with the Iron Emir Abdur-Rahman Khan. You stand in a dimly lit room where maps are unrolled across a table, candles flicker, and two men argue softly over lines that look harmless on paper, but cut deep into the earth. The result is the Durand Line, a boundary drawn to separate British India from Afghanistan. This border slices right through Pashtun tribal lands, splitting villages, families, and grazing routes as if they were mere ink blots. You watch Abdur-Rahman's face as he signs his expression, hard to read. Historians still argue whether he agreed under duress or with cold calculation to secure British subsidies. Either way, the line is drawn and it will haunt Afghan politics forever. You step outside into the sharp mountain air, realizing the people on both sides of the new line don't care about foreign maps. For them, their tribal ties are stronger than any boundary. You trek through Waziristan and the tribal belt, where British forts dot the landscape like nervous outposts. Afghan tribesmen cross the border as if it doesn't exist, raiding and trading freely. The British send expeditions to punish them, but every campaign ends the same: burned forts, lost men retreat. You hear soldiers curse the Durand Line as a joke, while local fighters laugh and melt back into the hills. Meanwhile, Abdur-Rahman tightens his grip at home, using British money to modernize his army and crush dissent. You wander Kabul's streets, noticing signs of change, new barracks, factories, and even telegraphs buzzing with messages. But his rule is harsh. Rebellions are met with brutal crackdowns, and entire tribes are relocated to weaken their power. The quirky tidbit you overhear: he reportedly had a collection of mechanical toys sent by Queen Victoria, which he displayed proudly while ruling with a hand of steel. Imagine playing with clockwork animals while plotting tribal subjugation. Talk about contrasts. As the century nears its end, British and Russian tensions remain high. The great game continues in shadows. Spies disguised as merchants slip through markets, secret maps pass from hand to hand, and caravans carry not just goods, but information. You sit in a tea house where an old trader mutters, "They fight over our land like dogs over a bone, but the bone never breaks." You sip your tea, smiling at the truth in his words. The Durand Line, however, doesn't fade. It becomes a scar, a reminder that Afghanistan's sovereignty is constantly tested. Even now, the border is porous and contested, and you can feel its weight as you walk along it. It's as if the earth itself resents the ink. When Abdur-Rahman dies in 1901, the country breathes a cautious sigh. His successor, Habibullah Khan, takes power, inheriting a land still balancing between tradition and the modern world. You watch as he opens schools, sends students abroad, and introduces new ideas while treading carefully with Britain. The empire, still stung by its past failures, prefers influence to invasion, and Afghanistan, for the moment, drifts in relative calm. One evening, you sit atop a ridge where the sun dips behind jagged peaks, staining the sky orange and gold. The wind is cold, but the view stretches endlessly, a reminder of how impossible it is to contain this land with a single line on a map. Below, villages glow with firelight, oblivious to treaties signed far away. You realize borders may shift, empires may scheme, but Afghanistan remains itself, untamed, watchful, waiting. As night settles, the stars return glittering like they did centuries before. They see everything, those stars, and they know the story isn't over. Another storm is brewing just beyond the horizon. You feel the air change as you step into 1919, a year when the world is exhausted from the Great War and empires are frayed at the edges. Britain, victorious in Europe but weakened, clings to its colonies with trembling fingers. Afghanistan senses the moment like a hawk catching the scent of freedom on the wind. You ride alongside Amanullah Khan, the ambitious young ruler who has just seized the throne after the assassination of his father, Habibullah. The air crackles with his boldness. He dreams of full independence, not just the illusion of it. Amanullah wastes no time. He declares Afghanistan's independence not as a polite request, but as a fact, and you can almost hear the British choking on their tea. Historians still argue whether he acted out of nationalism or sheer opportunism, but either way he knew the empire was stretched too thin to react decisively. The Third Anglo-Afghan War bursts into motion that May, short but sharp. Afghan forces cross the border into British India, while British planes, the first the Afghans have ever seen, buzz overhead like angry metal hornets. You shield your eyes as bombs drop, tiny by today's standards, but terrifying then. You march with Afghan fighters who wield rifles with one hand and tribal pride with the other. They move fast, hit hard, and fade back into the hills. British troops respond with artillery and aircraft pounding villages in retaliation. The fighting is fierce but brief. Both sides are exhausted, neither can afford a long war. After just a few months, negotiations begin. You watch Amanullah ride to peace, talks, his face, calm eyes, gleaming with quiet triumph. The Treaty of Rawalpindi is signed in August 1919, and with it, Britain formally recognizes Afghanistan's independence in foreign affairs. The leash is cut. You hear the cheers in Kabul, the firing of rifles in celebration, the drums pounding late into the night. For the first time in decades, Afghans feel the taste of full sovereignty on their tongues. It's sweet and smoky like tea brewed over a wood fire. You stroll through Kabul's streets during the celebrations where flags wave and women peek from windows smiling. Amanullah is hailed as a hero, but he is not content to stop there. You watch him launch ambitious reforms, modern schools, secular laws, the banning of child marriage, the encouragement of women to unveil. He invites foreign advisors, sends Afghan students to Europe, and even drafts a new constitution. The city hums with possibility like a candle suddenly burning brighter. Yet outside Kabul, the tribal elders grumble. They see his westernization as an attack on tradition, and their resistance simmers quietly at first. The quirky tidbit: Amanullah once tried to introduce Western-style dress codes, and villagers burned their new clothes in protest, preferring their old ways. You can almost hear them say, "Nice try, King." Meanwhile, Amanullah courts foreign alliances, including with the newly formed Soviet Union, while keeping Britain at a wary distance. Afghanistan becomes a stage where ideologies flirt and clash, a country no longer just a pawn, but an unpredictable player. You sit in a palace courtyard, listening to Amanullah speak passionately about modernization, and you can't help but admire his vision, even as you sense the storm clouds gathering. By 1921, Afghanistan signs a treaty with Britain confirming full diplomatic equality and embassies open across Europe. Amanullah tours Europe himself, charming leaders and soaking in ideas. You follow him to Rome, Paris, Berlin, watching him marvel at architecture, cars and cinemas. He returns inspired, ready to transform Afghanistan into a modern nation, but you know that back home tradition waits like a coiled snake. As dusk falls over the mountains, you ride with Afghan soldiers patrolling the border, the Durand line still lurking in the background. Independence has been won, but it feels fragile, like a clay pot that could crack with one wrong move. Amanullah's reforms blaze ahead, but the old ways do not die quietly. You sense that Afghanistan's independence is secure, yet its future will be anything but simple. Under a starry sky, you hear the land breathe free at last, but restless. You walk through the streets of Kabul in the early 1920s and the city feels like it's trying on a new suit, one sleeve modern the other, still stitched from centuries past. Amanullah Khan, fresh from his European tour, is back with a head full of ideas and a heart full of fire. He wants railways, factories, Western-style schools and equality for women. You watch workers hammering away at new buildings while mullahs frown from the mosque steps, murmuring warnings. Historians still argue whether Amanullah's reforms were too fast or whether Afghanistan simply wasn't ready, but the tension is unmistakable. The king's vision races ahead while the country clings to the familiar. You stroll into a school where girls unveiled recite lessons in bright voices, their eyes shining with curiosity. For a moment it feels like change is unstoppable. Amanullah's queen, Soraya, appears confident, elegant, and outspoken. She advocates for women's rights and education, a bold move that sparks admiration in Kabul, but outrage in the countryside. The quirky tidbit, Soraya once tore off her veil in public to encourage Afghan women to follow suit, a gesture so shocking at the time that it still ripples through memory. Amanullah pushes harder. He abolishes slavery, reforms the legal system, and tries to limit the power of tribal chiefs and religious leaders. He sends students abroad, invites European architects to redesign parts of Kabul, and begins building a new capital at Darulaman, a city of broad avenues and European-style palaces. You walk those half-finished streets, the dust swirling around columns that look like they belong in Vienna. They gleam with promise, yet you sense they're vulnerable, like a dream half awake. Out in the provinces, whispers grow louder. Tribal leaders grumble about taxes, elders resent schools that teach new ideas, and mullahs preach that the king is betraying Islam. Amanullah, perhaps too confident, brushes off their warnings. You ride with him to a rural meeting where he argues for reforms, only to be met with stony faces. One elder mutters, "You may be king, but you are not above God." You shiver, sensing the divide widening. Meanwhile, foreign powers watch closely. The British, smarting from their losses, quietly hope the reforms will fail and weaken Afghanistan. The Soviets, eager for influence, offer support and advisors. Afghanistan becomes a delicate balancing act, a tightrope, where one slip could send everything crashing down. By the late 1920s, the strain shows. Revolts flare in the countryside, and Amanullah responds with force, alienating more tribes. You watch fires blaze in distant valleys, the air thick with rebellion. Then comes the spark that ignites the powder keg, a rebellion led by Habibullah Kalakani, a bandit-turned leader who rallies the discontented under a cry to defend tradition. Amanullah's army, weakened by desertions, collapses faster than anyone expects. In January 1929, Amanullah abdicates and flees, leaving behind his palaces and his dreams. You walk through the abandoned halls of Darulaman, dust coating the marble echoes of ambition, fading into silence. The modern city he envisioned stands like a ghost, a reminder that progress here is never simple. Historians still debate whether Amanullah was a visionary ahead of his time or a reckless reformer who pushed too hard. Maybe he was both. Kalakani takes power, but his rule is brief and chaotic. Soon Nadir Khan rises, defeats Kalakani, and restores some order. He rolls back many of Amanullah's reforms, choosing stability over rapid change. You wander Kabul's streets again, noticing how quickly the new clothes and new ideas vanish, replaced by the old rhythms of life. The country exhales, as if relieved to return to what it knows, even at the cost of its dreams. As the 1930s dawn, Afghanistan stands independent yet inward-looking, proud yet scarred by the clash between modernity and tradition. The mountains, as always, watch silently, their faces unchanged by the drama below. You sit on a hilltop at sunset, the sky melting into orange and purple, and you wonder, was Amanullah's vision merely delayed, waiting for another time, or was it a candle snuffed out by the wind of history? The night answers only with stars, the same stars that watched the British retreat, and the same stars that will watch what comes next. You step cautiously into the 1930s and 1940s, a period when Afghanistan seems to walk on a narrow bridge between two chasms. The world outside is spinning economic depression, rising fascism, global war. But here, under King Nadir Shah and later his son Zahir Shah, the country holds its breath. You wander Kabul's quiet streets where the call to prayer mingles with the sound of hoofbeats, and you sense a fragile calm. Independence has been won, yet the lessons of Amanullah's fall weigh heavy. The new rulers move slowly, reforming with caution, as if testing the ground with each step. King Nadir Shah, who seized power after Kalakhani's fall, rules firmly until his assassination in 1933. You stand in the palace courtyard on that fateful day, hearing the crack of a rifle and the stunned silence that follows. His teenage son, Zahir Shah, ascends the throne, his youth a symbol of a fresh start. But real power lies initially with his uncles, who govern carefully, balancing tradition with the need to modernize. Historians still argue whether this cautious approach saved Afghanistan from chaos or kept it locked in stagnation. You travel with traders through the countryside where life remains much as it has for centuries. Farmers plow with wooden tools, shepherds guide flocks across stony hills, and villages cling to old ways. The quirky tidbit you pick up: in some areas, radios become the first modern gadget to truly capture Afghan hearts. Men gather around crackling speakers in tea houses, listening to far-off voices with wide-eyed wonder, even as they joke that the radio must be powered by trapped spirits. The government cautiously introduces reforms, new schools, roads, and limited industry, but avoids antagonizing tribal leaders or religious authorities. You see boys in classrooms learning to read, but in many villages, elders still resist sending their children to these foreign schools. The push and pull between progress and tradition continues, but at a gentler pace than under Amanullah. The outside world doesn't leave Afghanistan alone. During World War II, the country declares neutrality, a move that keeps it out of direct conflict, but attracts the attention of both Allied and Axis powers. You overhear whispers in Kabul's coffee houses about German engineers building roads and British agents plotting to limit their influence. The Great Game morphs into something subtler with Afghanistan again as the board. After the war, Zahir Shah gradually takes more control, promoting cautious modernization in the 1950s. You walk through Kabul as new buildings rise, cinemas open, and young people adopt bits of Western fashion. Yet beyond the city, the rural heartland remains steadfastly traditional. You sip tea with a village elder who chuckles at the capital's changes, saying, "Let them build their cities. The mountains will stay the same." You can't help but smile knowing he's right. Afghanistan begins receiving aid from both the United States and the Soviet Union, playing one against the other like a skilled chess player. Dams, roads, and airports spring up, symbols of development and of the new global tug of war. Historians still debate whether these projects strengthened the country or merely made it a pawn in a bigger game, but at the time, the future feels cautiously hopeful. Walking through Kabul's gardens at dusk, you hear laughter music, the hum of a city slowly awakening to the modern world. Yet, in the distance, the mountains loom, reminding you that any change here must pass their silent test. Afghanistan remains fiercely independent, threading its own path between empire's ideology and its own unyielding traditions. The winds of the Cold War begin to stir, but for now, under Zahir Shah's steady hand, Afghanistan enjoys a rare stretch of peace. You lie back under the stars, the same stars that saw Amanullah's rise and fall, the same stars that watched the British retreat. They twinkle as if to say peace never lasts forever, but tonight, rest easy. You step into the mid-20th century, and Afghanistan hums with the quiet rhythm of a country both proud and cautious, like a cat perched on a narrow wall. Under King Zahir Shah's reign, stability stretches over decades, and you can almost relax as you wander Kabul's tree-lined avenues, where students spill out of schools and shopkeepers polish their wares in the sunlight. It's a rare calm in Afghan history, and you savor it as the city smells faintly of bread and rosewater. The king, wise enough to avoid provoking tribal leaders, rules, gently allowing a parliament drafting a constitution in 1964 and giving women the right to vote. Historians still argue whether this was a golden age or just the eye of a storm, but you can feel that something fragile and precious lives here. You drift through university halls buzzing with debate where young Afghans discuss Marx's democracy and Islam with equal passion. You pass bookshops filled with Persian poetry and Russian novels side by side, a mix that seems charming until you realize it mirrors the geopolitical chess outside. The United States builds schools and hospitals. The Soviet Union sends engineers and advisors. Afghanistan, clever as ever, accepts aid from both sides, balancing like a tightrope walker between two giants. The quirky tidbit you overhear American advisors, unused to Kabul's altitude, often fainted during construction projects only to be revived with tea by amused locals. The mountains may have been laughing softly at them too. In the countryside, life remains stubbornly timeless. Farmers till fields with oxen and tribal councils settle disputes under the shade of ancient trees. When you sit with them, they offer you tea so sweet it makes your teeth ache, and they speak with pride about independence, not as a legal concept, but as a way of life. No foreign power tells them how to live, and they intend to keep it that way. You feel the weight of that independence woven into every stone and every face. Yet beneath the calm cracks appear. Political factions stir, leftists inspired by socialism, conservatives holding to tradition, and Islamists whispering about moral decay. In Kabul, protests flare, sometimes peaceful, sometimes not. Zahir Shah tries to balance reform and tradition, but balancing acts rarely last forever. Historians still debate whether he could have acted sooner to unify these currents, or whether Afghanistan's path was already set by forces larger than any king. As the 1970s arrive, the mood shifts. You hear whispers of discontent even as the city still glows at sunset. In 1973, while Zahir Shah is abroad, his cousin Daud Khan seizes power in a bloodless coup, ending the monarchy and declaring a republic. You watch the old royal flag lowered, and the streets grow eerily quiet. Afghanistan remains independent, but the delicate stability feels like a vase tipped to one side. Daud tries to modernize and navigate the Cold War with his own vision, yet his reforms stir old tensions. The mountains, as always, stand still waiting. You pause here at the edge of a future you know will grow darker. Soviet influence grows, political factions clash, and the peace you have walked through begins to unravel. Yet tonight, you hold on to this moment in the mid-20th century when Afghanistan still shaped its own path, proud and unbowed, walking between worlds with its head held high. The stars emerge again over the Hindu Kush, shining with the same steady light they have given since the first invader dared step into these valleys. They have seen empires come and go, kings rise and fall, and still they keep their watch. You breathe in the cool night air and let the story settle. You slow your steps, letting the edges of the mountains blur in the dusk. The fires in the villages burn low, sending tiny sparks into the sky like fading memories. The night air softens the sharp sense of smoke and earth, blending into something calming. You hear the faint murmur of voices, people sharing stories as they have for centuries, slipping into the background like a lullaby. The stars above you glow brighter, countless and patient, as if they know that all things, even the fiercest storms, eventually give way to stillness. You lie back in the grass, feeling the ground solid and cool beneath you. The voices fade, the wind slows, and the mountains dark against the sky seem to lean in like old friends whispering secrets only to you. Afghanistan's story is not simple, not easy, but it is alive, woven with courage, scars, and dreams. You let that story drift across your thoughts like a slow river, soothing and unhurried. Your breath matches the rhythm of the land, in and out, steady and calm. The stars seem closer now, their light softening everything around you. You feel safe, small, yet part of something vast and ancient. The night wraps around you like a blanket, and even the mountains seem to sigh as if they too are ready to rest. And with that, the story fades into silence, leaving you with peace in your heart and the stars above watching over you.